am going to get going, and we will welcome those people that join us a bit late. So my name is Paula Kensington, and today is about mandated climate reporting, and we call that getting beyond net zero and actually being authentic in our sustainability. So I'm representing Future Value, a company that is very much embedded in regenerative development, and what impact does that mean on community and on business, and globally, what does that mean? So let's get going. Today, we're just going to set the scene here. We know it's mandated climate reporting, so let's just remind ourselves why we need to act now. I will share with you a ESG adoption maturity curve that shows the opportunity and the advantage of acting now, not just about compliance, but getting beyond that. We'll talk through the new regulation, which is based in AASB standard 2 in Australia, but the training that we are doing actually can be nuanced to any of the IASB and the different jurisdiction comparatives. So then we'll talk about some challenges and opportunities. We'll touch upon why business is paralysed and how to get beyond that to an action plan. I want to share with you some tools and templates that we've created, and then we'll wrap up. So we've got about 45 minutes together. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Paula Kensington. I have got a lot of experience in commercial finance roles. Over 3 decades, I have been in the finance leadership, CFO chair, and I think I understand the place that the finance community finds itself and has done over the last 30 years. But more than that, I have also represented ACCA in a governance role where I've been a representative of the local panel in Australia and New Zealand, but also on the global panel representing the whole global membership. And I'm very passionate about sustainability, about climate, and I've always been passionate about how to make us and the world that we live in future-proof. And you don't have to take my word for how important this is. For those of you who know Lee White, who's the CEO of IFAC now, this is a quote from him: that professionals, accountants play a pivotal role in enhancing the quality of sustainability information. All right, so just briefly touching on this from Deloitte's 2024 sustainability report. This was really aimed at business leaders to show them the importance of climate change, and it now is in the top 3 of strategic priorities. And so it comes as no surprise to us in finance, but just wanted to show you that. 70% of global C-suite leaders expect climate to have a high or very high impact on their strategy, and we'll touch on that today when we talk about scenarios. And 45% are saying that they're overhauling the core business model for the transition. And that's huge. And I keep saying that if our spreadsheets don't change, nothing changes. And you're probably having a smile at that as a finance professional, but it's true. We can talk all we like about the glossy reports and the sustainability initiatives that we're taking, but if our spreadsheets don't change, action often doesn't change. Underlying action doesn't change. So we will look to that as well together. Okay, so what are some of the blockers? Why is finance late to this party? Now, we know that mandated climate reporting is only just coming in here in Australia, with Group 1 now, very much in the first year of, having to do the reporting to June 2026. And we know that everything then is rolling out subsequently for Group 2 and 3. But my narrative is that all finance professionals should be thinking about climate reporting, even if they may be even falling under or outside of Group 1, 2, and 3, or indeed might be a non-reporting entity, because This impacts the whole of business. And if you're a non-reporting entity, you will get caught up in this because of the supply chain, that you'll become someone else's problem. So what are the blockers? Why are we not getting into this with more gusto? And I think I've got 4 of my top reasons here. I'll be interested to see what you think around some of the top blockers and how do we actually unblock those. So my first one is around governance. Governance is being vague. It might feel like it's a little wishy-washy. You know, we talk about the assurance of this coming in over the next 3 to 5 years. And so like who's doing what? People are confused or not sure about the accountability and the ownership that's required. So my first blocker is around governance is being vague. Then we move on to another blocker, which shouldn't be, because finance people are quite comfortable with the feeling of materiality. But this might be something that, you know, has pushed us outside of our comfort zone. What are these boundaries that we hear about? What are these planetary boundaries that we want to set for ourselves in our organization? So maybe materiality and boundaries is something that's a little bit mystifying still for us. The third blocker is around what I call the system debt and scattered data. And I've written a recent article on this, that I think finance has probably over the last 20 years not invested enough dollars and time into supporting the underlying systems and standard operating procedures that are sort of being seen as back-end support rather than front-end driving revenue. And so that's left us with this system debt. And then we've got all this scattered data everywhere. We've got all of this kind of non-financial data that doesn't consolidate, that doesn't easily get managed in a way that financial data does. So we've got a problem there. And then the final blocker I've called regulation complexity. Often in finance, if we don't know something 100%, we kind of feel, concerned by that. We're not being able to speak about it. And so we call it this regulation complexity, and that can often hold us back. So those might be some of the 4 blockers, and I'd be interested to hear what you think as well, and if I've missed something that would be in the top 4. And so I think what we're going to do today is actually start to talk about the pathways and explore some of the tools and the narratives that's going to allow us to unblock those blockers. So let's have a look at governance being vague. Well, the first tool that I'm going to share with you today is an accountability map. And unsurprisingly, 4 pillars, because those are the 4 pillars that come from the AASB standard. So we will look at that together. We need to create the financial metrics to enable us to be able to measure something, which we love doing. We need to be able to set some metrics, and they will be different to what we're kind of used to in the past. And I'll share with you again today a financial playbook that's going to start looking at some of those financial metrics. What might they be? Because it's a new language for us, and it's a new set of measures that we have to come up with the business to, create. What should they be? And then we need to manage our stakeholders. So not only external stakeholders that are going to be the recipients of our report, but more importantly, I think, is our internal stakeholders in the operations, in the business, making sure that people understand what's required of us and what does that mean for them and what does that mean for us in our business. Because we think there's going to be a huge transformation required to be able to meet this climate reporting requirements. Okay, so let's have a look at materiality and boundaries. We have got a materiality dossier that goes through how did we decide whether something's material or not in our manufacturing or in our service providers, whatever we do in our business. We have to create this dossier that's going to allow us to not only make the decisions, but to show the auditor that this is how we made those decisions. We have to look at all of the risks, which we're very familiar with, but we also balance that with looking at the opportunities for us in our business today, in our business short term, medium term, long term. And then we're starting to build this resilience and resilient sort of framework, but that then gives us the relevance. If we don't do this work and we're not able to communicate it, I'm saying in the next 3 to 5 years, our businesses that aren't doing this are going to lose relevance. And that means market share, consumer demand, that's going to be very isolating for businesses that aren't thinking about their impact and the climate impact that the business has on the climate and vice versa. Okay, so what can we do with system debt and scattered data? We might not have unlimited budgets that we can go and obviously upgrade our systems, but we can do things using tools like Excel, where we've got an e-ledger scheme. We start to actually map out what is our scope 1, 2, and 3, and where are the big suppliers, how do we capture that data? So making a start, and again, I've got something to share with you today on how to do that. So how do we think about the controls and the data, and how we're going to measure and demonstrate protocols in collecting that data and managing that data? And then finally, something around regulation complexity. That's maybe why you're here today, to listen and to share in how do I upskill myself? How do I understand what is coming, what is required? So I'm going to share with you my MVP disclosure, which is my minimum viable product. We'll talk about a financial bridge and reconciliation between climate and finance. And how do we build new narratives? What are the stories that we need to start building for sharing in the business, but also sharing with our board, with our stakeholders, and our reports? So I might leave that today for the poll, and we might move on, but I'd be very interested to hear what you think resonates with you here, and if I've missed any blockers, if there are things that you think are more important that are holding us back, I'd love to be able to hear that as well. So I'm just going to move on from this today. So the ESG adoption curve, this is showing us the maturity of where businesses are at. So the bell curve, at the top of the bell curve, where it's kind of mainstream to the right there, is what I'm saying is the ESG responders. So this is where we're taking advantage of the regulation. We're allowing it to unlock growth for our business. We're building capability, and we might then be able to drive revenue and certainly renew contracts where this is important for our customer or our supplier. So if we're working with government or industry bodies or large group 1 or reporting entities that are already large entities reporting, we can take advantage of demonstrating that we are compliant, that we are responding to the regulation. Then on beyond that, it's building beyond compliance. We're going to optimization advantage, where we can actually start turning that data that we're collecting for compliance into profitable making data. How do we actually enable that to understand better our business, our customers, our suppliers? We can take that data and actually derive more insights from it. It gives us information. It allows us to be innovative. It might be able to think about what our customer experience is as well. And also, when we have data, we can actually then start thinking about how do we accelerate and deepen so that we get better decision making. And then at the top of what we call our pyramid, but at the bottom here, these are a small number of businesses worldwide that are actually ESG leaders, thinking about how do we turn this into competitive advantage? How do we understand our supply chain and build resilience into that? How do we get a deeper understanding of our business and the impacts that it has on the climate and vice versa? And how does that give us opportunities for our value chain? And then on the left-hand side is the cost of doing nothing. We often hear about business case to support the sustainability business case, but I think it's very much a popular conversation that actually the cost of doing nothing is going to be a higher cost than actually the cost of engaging. And I've seen support of that all over globally. So what happens if we want to take advantage of the regulation? Well, this is what AASB Standard 2 says in Australia that we have to do these 5 things. We have to think about governance, we have to think about the oversight of governance, the management roles that we have underneath, the strategic roles that we have, the skills and the incentives that we need and that we need to remunerate with in our business. So we need to make sure that the guardrails are updated and climate purpose. Then we think about risk management. We think about what are the processes in our business to identify and to assess those risks when we're managing climate specific risks. So making sure we bring climate and sustainability and impact into our risk register and our enterprise risk management system. Then we think about strategy. We think about the material climate related risks and opportunities and their impact on our strategy. And that will be where we start reconciling climate strategy with our financial strategy. There's no point us hanging 2 different strategies. We need to be able to actually reconcile and make sure that they're talking to each other. And then we talked about this earlier. What are the metrics? We need to start creating new metrics, new KPIs, new measures that are climate related. And finally, we talk about scenarios, and we have to come up with 2 climate scenarios. It might be, a 2 degree or a 1.5 degree global warming, and then we have to choose one that's worse, and whether that's a 3 or 4 degree climate warming. Now, we don't have to be climate scientists as finance professionals, but we do have to think about what those scenarios might mean for our financial data, whether that's revenue, margin, cost base, market share. There's a huge amount of impact that the climate is going to have, and we have to show that in our financials. We have to show that in our sustainability report underneath AASB S2. So we need to understand that. We've got a new baseline. It comes as no surprise to people in finance that the world is moving towards this, whether it's mandated or not. So this is my first template I want to share with you, and it talks about the 4 pillars. So going back to governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics. This is a simple Excel template, and it can be something that you start today. This can be something you start to give yourself a framework to understand where the gaps are. So if we think about what's required from a governance perspective, what is the task that we have to deliver? Who's the owner? Who's going to drive it? What's the assurance? What's the control? What's the proof point? And what's the status? And what's the evidence? Where's the file? Where's the pathway that you can point to when you're going to get this audited as well? And then this gives you a Gantt chart effectively as to what's happening and when. So you've got here governance. Have we got a board and a program charter approved? And have we got audit and risk cadence set? Who might be the owner? Might be the CFO, might be the company secretary, if that's a different person, depending on the size and complexity of your business. So what then you might see underneath that, because obviously the top part is very much the summary, but underneath that is what are the activities that we actually have to do and who's the owner, so you can get control and ownership. So, we need to draft a climate and sustainability charter. We need to draft a program charter. We need to define what the decision rights are and who's going to do what, whether it's the board, the audit, the CFO, the finance leader, the sustainability leader, the ops director, who's going to take ownership of what. And then we take away that vagueness. We suddenly become really clear about who's doing what and by when. And then we've got, underneath scenario, the strategy, we've got, scenario register. Have we, started to detail out our assumptions? Have we chosen the scenarios we want to test ourselves with? That might sit in FP&A, or it might sit underneath, if we don't have a head of FP&A, it might still be the CFO or financial control. Then we think about, building resilience, having an adaptation pipeline. These are really practical steps that you can assign to the right owners. And then we go on through risk management and then metrics. So hopefully that's giving you a taste of how do I do this? and often we feel like, we can't make a start because it is complex. And believe me, I know it's complex. We've been up to our armpits in greenhouse gas protocols. Where are the factors? Where are the industry benchmarks? We've done a lot of this work ourselves. So we know the rules, and we've actually built a training program. So today is about sharing with you some information, but really it's about, do you need to come along on a training journey with me, or are you comfortable to do this work with a bit of, with a sort of a minimum viable product, if you like? So we'll get to that a bit later, but we've been doing the work, so I know how complicated this can be and time consuming. And I've spent the last 12 months, probably 18 months, pulling all of this together as my full-time job. So I don't know how finance leaders get to do this on their own, because as a CFO, I never had spare time to go out and find all of this information. So I've done that hard work for you. So just wanted to share with you an example of what climate scenarios might look like. And this might feature as your external report, or this might be something you keep internally and you pull out some narratives for your external report. But there are different pathways, and there are scenario guidelines. Again, I'll share with you more about that if you're interested. But there's 3 different ways of getting to potential scenarios. There's a disorderly and disruptive and very reactive pathway. There's more of a transitional pathway that has got taking early action and having some advantage. And then there's kind of the hothouse chaos, system shock pathway. And you can see the impacts here, hypothetical impacts on a company's current baseline. So, you can see here that potentially under that disorderly pathway, we've got operating costs blowing out at 13.5% growth. Some of that is being driven by insurance. You can see about 6 or 7 lines down. If I've got 18 million insurance costs today, it could rise, depending on the nature of my business, to 40 million in a disorderly, disruptive climate scenario. If, on the other hand, we've got more of a projected, consistent, early action taken scenario, my insurance costs might actually increase from 18 million to 25 million. Whilst it's a huge increase, it's not as bad, and the impact is not as horrendous as the disorderly pathway. And then if we look at the hothouse, the huge system shock, crisis-driven action, that's off the chart. So we've got to do this work. We've got to understand, like, what does this mean? What do these scenarios mean for my business? And how much of this is actually true for my business? Like, could it mean that my business isn't resilient at a 3-degree warming planet? That is serious information that we need to put together and to then share with stakeholders in our business. Okay, so moving on, I've got here something that I think finance leaders will find interesting. Like, we need to build a new business model. And this is what I said right at the start, that if our spreadsheets don't change, then nothing changes. So what do we need to think about when we're building a new playbook? So we might think about what is the financial step? What is the financial metrics? What are the models that I might need to look at? And what might be some outcomes of that? So let's have a think about, translating the model assumptions. How do I think about a climate adjusted discounting factor? What does that mean for the discount factor that I've been using for the last 3-5 years? What does that mean in terms of calculating my new weighted average cost of capital? So we've got the net greening financial systems metrics. There's a carbon price. There's all these. This might be new language for you, but there's all these industry metrics that we can use as guidelines. And then what might be the outcome for my business? Well, I might be able to align corporate risk with how I allocate capital allocation, and how do I then think about disclosure processes? So, importantly, how do I stress test KPIs? So some of these KPIs here are very much driven from, a finance sector, but I need to think about creating what might be a stranded asset index. I might need to think about what my resilience capex share is, what my green to brown ratios are, what my internal tax rate might, or tax return calculations might be. Yeah. So, it's starting to think about my business differently. I think importantly is the third one down, the hardwired decisions. How does the executive bonuses and the remuneration report, how are they tying in to climate action? And I was looking at this at the moment, some of the reporting entities are being quite silent on this point, that there are actually no executive incentives or KPIs are relating to climate action yet. But I would suggest when we see next year in August 2026, there's going to have to be in the remuneration report details of how executives' bonuses are tied to climate action. And then we need to iterate annually. So getting the assurance feedback, building trust in our brand and resilience in our financial outcomes. So you can see here, the network for greening a financial system. That's where I've got this information from. So as I said before, I've spent the last 18 months doing the research for you so that you can come in and actually start to get what are the key things that I can point to and that I can go and find out more information from, or come on to the training. This is the minimum viable product. This is, again, pointing back to those 4 pillars of governance, strategy, risk, and metrics. And what do I need to do? What is the minimum I can do right now? So again, disclosing to the board and management oversight of climate-related risks and opportunities. The CFO can ensure that the audit and risk committees are referenced and confirm linkage to financial oversight. What can I do from a strategy perspective? We can identify material climate risks and opportunities and describe what the impact on the strategy will be at that 1.5, 2 degrees, and the other one, whether that's a 3 degree or warmer. What are the impacts on the strategy? And how do then I integrate that into the budgets and forecasts, and how I allocate capital, and how do I test resilience of those new business plans? And then when I come to risk and our enterprise risk management, I need to start thinking about bringing in climate risks and sustainability risks, showing that integration, embedding that into climate risk registers and linking that to risk categories, and then ensuring that the owner of those risks understands what that means from a climate perspective. And then finally, thinking about new metrics and targets, what they might look like from scope 1, 2, or 3 emissions, climate-related targets, and other key measures. So we've talked about discounted cash flows. That's obviously going to impact net present value calculations and weighted average cost of capital, and also then impairments and cost of capital moving forward. So we know that this is the biggest shift. Climate and sustainability reporting over the next 3 to 5 years is the biggest shift in decades. If we think back to IFRS that came out in 2001, that's 25 years ago. This is going to be the next biggest thing since then. And CFOs, finance leaders have a critical role to play in this, ensuring not only from a compliance perspective, but ensuring that we get to that beyond compliance, beyond that regulation advantage, getting into that optimization and into that strategic advantage. How do we create new internal metrics that drive real change? And how do I think about the narratives for my external messaging, which balances that action with assurance? So we move from being paralyzed to actually being powerful, and we're building knowledge. And so we need to set foundations in our business. We need to understand regulation. We need to move from regulation into clarity. We need to think about how does that translate into my business? How do I operationalize this into my business? How do I stand up these environmental ledgers? How do I kick off supplier programs? How do we prepare the audit and risk to be able to help manage and govern this? How do we really bring that policy into practice? And then potentially the most important is, how do we bridge that to the financials? How do we actually close the gap between climate and sustainability and financial strategy? And so that's really about embedding the scenarios into our strategies. And then how do we think about, capital allocation, for example? How do we think about allocating not just financial capital, but other forms of capital? And how do we think about that in terms of our policies? What needs updating? At Future Value, we've created a regenerative capital allocation policy and a regenerative risk policy. And with our regenerative development framework, we've got a beautiful three-legged stool that actually, those are our fundamental policies that drive all of the behaviours in our business. So what does that mean in your business? So there's a lot of work behind those 4 buckets of governance, risk, strategy, and metrics. And you can absolutely do that work yourself. I've given you here the minimum viable product. I've shown you a few examples of tools that you might want to use, and you can absolutely do that. And if you want the Excel files or the actual editable files, please reach out, and I'm happy to have a conversation with you about that. But I'm also here to say that I have built with Future Value a mandated climate training program, which is comprehensive and will give you the support and the tools and the frameworks that you're going to need for the next 3 to 5 years. We're going to translate those climate risks into a financial model. We're going to build resilience through data and action, and I'm going to help show you how to turn that compliance advantage into competitive advantage. We'll build together metrics and new language and new playbooks and look at governance structures to ensure that we're ready for assurance. So here on the left-hand side, this beautiful pyramid, we're here at compliance. This is our starting point. We're then going to get through compliant, and we're going to start thinking about, how do I optimize this work, this data for my business? How do I start taking advantage of the optimization and the strategic advantage to move beyond and get into that authentic sustainability? So the training program is a 3-day, full 3 days together online, and it's going to be with me for 6 hours a day, starting on the 24th of November. And then following on the 25th of November, and then coming back in February after Christmas and summer holidays here in Australia. And you'll get access to the online platform. We've got case studies. We've got people there that have done this in the group 1 and previously, looking at the pitfalls, the challenges, areas that you might want to spend more time. There's a community right there, and there's, supportive learning, case studies, and all sorts. So if you're ready to find out more, you can click here on the QR code. You can go to futurevalue.global/MCR, or you can reach out to me. I would be happy to have a conversation with you. So that is the presentation today. As I said, there's some tools and templates there that I can absolutely share with you. If you'd like, please reach out. I will share this recording for those that couldn't make it. And there's another webinar that I'm going to run on the 23rd of October at 7:30 Sydney, New South Wales time. So if you couldn't make today, there's another one on the 23rd. That's next Thursday at 7:30 p.m. So thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. Thank you for engaging with me. And if I can be of any further assistance, please reach out. Otherwise, I will hopefully see you again very soon. Bye for now.